Have you ever loved someone that the world said you didn't belong with? What would you do if you were carrying his child, but no one believed you? Maya was just a nurse. Black, quiet, invisible to most people. Then she got pregnant with a man everyone thought was far above her. But when he fell into a coma, something strange happened. Dozens of women came forward, white, wealthy, powerful, all claiming they were carrying his baby, and suddenly her truth meant nothing. So tell me, if your truth was real but the whole world called it a lie, would you fight or would you disappear? Stay with me. Maya Carter was 29 years old, but life had made her feel older in quiet ways. She had deep brown skin, calm eyes, sharp cheekbones, and a face that did not beg for attention. Still, once people looked at her long enough, they usually remembered her. There was something steady about her, something still, something strong. Maya worked as a nurse in a small community clinic on the east side of the city, where the paint on the walls had started to peel, and the waiting room was always too full. It was not a beautiful place. It was not a rich place, but it was honest. People came there when they were tired, scared, broke, or out of options, and Maya treated every one of them like they still mattered. She did not speak loudly. She did not move like someone trying to prove herself. She simply did her work, carefully, patiently, with both hands and her whole heart. Every morning, before the city fully woke up, Maya was already awake. Her alarm rang at 5:15. But most days, she opened her eyes before it made a sound. She would lie still for a few seconds, listening, not to traffic, not to birds, to her mother's breathing. Her mother, Grace Carter, slept in the small bedroom near the window, with an oxygen machine humming beside the bed. Some mornings the sound was smooth, some mornings it was rough. On the rough mornings, Maya's chest tightened before her feet even touched the floor. She would walk in quietly, adjust the blanket, check the tube, touch her mother's shoulder, and whisper, "Morning, Mama. I'm here." Grace would sometimes smile without opening her eyes. Sometimes she would cough so hard her whole body shook. Maya never showed fear when that happened. She would rub her mother's back, help her sit up, and wait until the coughing passed. Only after that would she breathe properly again. Chronic lung disease was the kind of illness that did not scream every day, but it never truly left the room. It sat in the corner. It waited. It took money. It took sleep. It took peace. Maya knew all of that. She also knew no one was coming to save them, so she became the kind of woman who did not wait for saving. She made coffee. She packed lunch. She counted pills. She folded bills into envelopes and prayed there would be enough. Some months there was, some months there wasn't. But somehow she kept going. At the clinic, patients loved her because she listened in a world that had become too busy to listen. An old man named Mr. Sandu. Harris came in every Thursday, even when he only needed his blood pressure checked, because Maya was the only person who asked him how his week had been and waited for the answer. A young mother once cried in Maya's arms because she had not slept in 3 days and felt ashamed to admit she was tired of being strong. Maya held her and said, "Being tired does not make you a bad mother." That was how Maya spoke. Simple words, no performance, no judgment, just truth, soft enough for people to receive. But outside the clinic, the world was not always soft with her. In expensive stores, security guards watched her a little too closely. In nice buildings, receptionists asked if she was there to clean before asking her name. In certain rooms, people spoke over her until they needed something only she knew how to do. Maya noticed everything. She noticed the quick looks, the polite distance, the careful smiles that were not really smiles. She noticed how some people could be poor and still be treated as unlucky, while people like her were treated as suspicious. But Maya had learned to choose her battles. If she fought every insult, she would have no strength left for the people who needed her. So she carried herself with dignity, quiet dignity, the kind that did not ask permission, the kind that made some people uncomfortable because they could not bend it. Love had not been easy for Maya either. Men had come into her life before. Some were kind at first. Some liked her beauty. Some liked her calm. Some liked the idea of being loved by a woman who gave deeply. But when they saw the weight of her life, many stepped back. Her mother's illness was too much. Her work schedule was too much. Her seriousness was too much. Her refusal to be treated like a temporary comfort was too much. Maya never begged them to stay. Not once. She would feel the hurt, swallow it quietly, and return to her life. Because she believed love that had to be begged for would one day become another kind of poverty. Still, there were nights when she sat alone at the kitchen table after her mother fell asleep, looking at the unpaid bills, the half-empty cup of tea, the quiet apartment, and something inside her would ache. Not loudly, just enough. She would wonder what it felt like to be chosen without having to explain her worth, what it felt like to be loved without being measured, what it felt like for someone to look at her life, see the struggle, and still say, "I'm staying." Then she would shake the thought away. Hope was dangerous when life had taught you to survive without it. Across the city, Ethan Cole was living a very different kind of loneliness. He was 34, white, tall, broad-shouldered, with tired blue eyes and the kind of face that looked calm even when his mind was not. To most people who met him, Ethan was just a construction engineer working on affordable housing projects around the city. He wore plain shirts, dusty boots, and drove an old gray pickup truck with a dent near the back bumper. He spoke little. He observed a lot. He did not throw money around. He did not mention his last name unless he had to, and that was intentional. Because Ethan Cole was not just a regular engineer, he was the only son of Richard Cole, one of the richest real estate developers in the state. The Cole family name was on office towers, luxury condos, private foundations, and political donor lists. It opened doors before Ethan even touched the handle, and he hated that. Not the privilege itself. He was not foolish enough to pretend it had not protected him. He hated what it did to people around him. The fake smiles, the sudden respect, the women who laughed too hard once they learned who he was, the men who treated him like a business opportunity instead of a person. The family pressure was worse. His father wanted him to marry into the right circle. His advisors wanted him polished. The board wanted him visible. The press wanted him charming. But Ethan wanted something quieter, something real. That was why he hid behind work boots and a plain truck. He wanted to know who people were when they thought he had nothing to give them. And for a while, the disguise protected him. Until the afternoon, he walked into Maya's clinic with a bleeding hand, a tired face, and no idea that the woman wrapping his wound would become the one person who saw him before she ever knew his name. Vanessa Blake was the third thread in this story. Though at first, no one would have called her dangerous. She was 30, white, stylish, sharp-eyed, and always perfectly put together. She worked in media relations and knew how to make people believe a story before they questioned it. Vanessa had been Maya's friend for years. They met at a community volunteer event, back when both of them were younger and still believed hard work would carry them exactly where they wanted to go. Vanessa admired Maya at first. She admired her calm, her honesty, her ability to be respected without trying. But admiration can turn sour when it sits too long beside insecurity. Vanessa wanted more. More money, more access, more rooms where people remembered her name. She told herself she deserved it. Maybe she did. But somewhere along the way, wanting a better life became something darker. She began to hate watching other people receive what she felt she had earned. And when Maya's life quietly moved toward Ethan Cole, Vanessa would smile like a friend, listen like a sister, and hide the first small spark of envy before it became a fire. Because sometimes the person standing closest to your heart is also close enough to wound it, and none of them knew yet that one ordinary meeting in a small clinic would soon pull love, money, race, pride, and truth into the same storm. The city liked to call itself equal, but equality in this place was more of a story than a fact. On the surface, everything looked balanced: clean sidewalks, glass buildings reflecting the sky, cafes where people spoke about dreams like they were plans already approved. But Maya had lived long enough to know the difference between what people said and what people actually lived in her part of the city. Survival came first: rent, medicine, food. Everything else came later, if it came at all. Most of the people there looked like her. Dark skin, tired eyes, strong backs that carried more than they should have to. They worked hard. They showed up. They did everything they were told would lead to something better. But somehow, better always seemed to stay just out of reach. Just a few miles away, the same city told a different story. Streets became quieter. Buildings became taller. Doors became heavier. Not just physically, but socially. You did not just walk into those places. You were expected to belong before you even arrived. And belonging there did not come from effort alone. It came from history, from money, from names people recognized. Maya had crossed into that world before. Once for a patient transfer, once for a community event, once because she took the wrong bus and got off too late. Each time, she felt it. The pause when she walked in, the quick glance from head to toe, the silent question behind polite smiles. Who are you? Why are you here? She never answered those questions out loud, but she felt them, and she carried them back with her every time. At the clinic, the difference showed up in quieter ways. Patients who waited too long because they could not afford to come sooner. People asking if there were cheaper versions of medications that already cost less than they should. Workers who hid their injuries because missing a shift meant losing everything. And then, sometimes, someone would walk in from the other side of the city. Clean clothes, confident posture, problems that had been small at the beginning, but were now serious because they assumed time would always be on their side. Maya treated them all the same. She always did. But she could not ignore the truth underneath it. Not everyone started from the same place. Not everyone had the same room to fail. That truth did not make her bitter. It made her careful. Careful with her expectations. Careful with her trust. Careful with hope. Because hope, in the wrong system, could turn into disappointment faster than anything else. There were moments when the divide became impossible to ignore, like the afternoon she finished a double shift and stopped by a grocery store in a nicer part of town, because it was on her way home. She was still in her scrubs, tired, quiet, focused on getting what she needed and leaving. But she noticed the way the security guard moved closer when she entered an aisle, the way a woman pulled her purse slightly tighter when Maya walked past, the way the cashier barely looked at her until it was time to pay, then suddenly watched her hands like she expected something to be taken. None of it was loud, none of it was direct, but it was clear. Maya paid, took her bag, walked out. She did not argue. She did not react. But in the car, for a brief moment, she closed her eyes and let herself feel it. Not anger, not even sadness. Just a quiet exhaustion. The kind that comes from being measured before being known. That was the world she lived in, a world where she had to prove her worth before she could even show it. A world where being calm was sometimes mistaken for being weak. A world where being strong often meant being invisible. And somewhere inside that same city, Ethan Cole was moving through a completely different version of reality without most people realizing it. To the public, he was just another engineer working on mid-range housing projects. He showed up early, left late, wore the same worn boots, spoke to workers like equals. He did not act like a man who could change the direction of entire neighborhoods with a single decision, and that was exactly how he wanted it. Because Ethan had seen the other side too clearly. The boardrooms, the private meetings, the quiet deals that determined who got access and who did not. He had watched his father build an empire that shaped the city, and he had also watched the cost of that power. Entire communities pushed further out. Affordable housing promised but delayed. Decisions made in comfort that affected people who would never sit at those tables. Ethan did not hate his father, but he did not want to become him either. That was why he stayed close to the ground, why he worked directly on sites, why he listened more than he spoke. He wanted to understand what the city actually felt like, not just what it looked like on reports, and slowly, he began to see the same divide Maya had always known. He saw workers who never complained, but were always one problem away from collapse. He saw neighborhoods where opportunity was something people talked about, not something they experienced. He saw how easy it was for people like him to move between worlds, and how impossible it was for others. And without realizing it, he started to look for something different, something honest. Something not influenced by his last name. Something that would not change the moment people knew who he was. That search, quiet as it was what brought him into Maya's clinic that day. Not just because of the injury on his hand, but because somewhere deeper, he was tired of being seen for everything except who he really was. And Maya, without trying, without knowing, was about to become the first person who saw him without any of the noise. And in a city built on quiet divisions and unspoken rules, that kind of connection was never simple, and it was never safe, and it was about to change both of their lives in ways neither of them could control. Ethan first walked into Maya's clinic on a quiet afternoon that did not feel important at the time. There was no music playing, no dramatic moment, just the soft hum of fluorescent lights and the low murmur of people waiting their turn. His hand was bleeding, not badly, but enough to leave small drops on the floor behind him. A cut, deep enough to need stitches, not deep enough to stop him from acting like it was nothing. He stepped to the front desk, said as little as possible, and sat down without looking around too much. That was how he moved through most places, quiet, observing, careful not to draw attention. When Maya called his name, he looked up for the first time, not because of the sound, but because of the way she said it. Calm, clear, no extra tone, no curiosity. Just respect. Ethan. That was it. No hesitation, no assumption. He followed her into the small treatment room, sat down, and placed his hand on the table. Maya did not ask unnecessary questions. She cleaned the wound, looked at it closely. "This will need stitches." Her voice stayed steady. "You'll feel a little pressure." Ethan nodded. He watched her hands, noticed how precise they were, not rushed, not careless. She did not look at him like she was trying to figure out who he was. She looked at him like he was simply a patient who needed care, and something about that felt different. "What happened?" she asked, not out of curiosity, but because it mattered medically. "Work accident," he replied. She nodded once. No follow-up, no judgment, no small talk to fill silence, just focus. That was new to him. Most people, even strangers, tried to read him, tried to place him, tried to guess his value before they decided how to treat him. Maya did none of that. She tied the last stitch, wrapped his hand, and said, "You should keep this dry for a few days. Come back if it swells." That was all. No smile meant to impress, no interest in who he might be outside that room. Just care, given clean and simple. Ethan stood there for a second longer than necessary, not because he wanted to say something clever, but because he was not used to leaving a place without leaving an impression. With her, he hadn't needed to. "Thank you," he said. She nodded. "Take care," and that was it. It should have ended there, but it didn't. 2 days later, he came back. The cut was healing fine. He did not need to return, but he did anyway. This time, he had a reason ready. Just wanted to make sure it's okay. Maya looked at the bandage, removed it, checked the stitches. It's healing. She said it simply, then paused. You didn't need to come in for this. Ethan almost smiled. I figured I'd rather be sure. She nodded again. No suspicion, no overthinking, just acceptance. That made it easy to come back again. And again. Sometimes with a real reason, sometimes with one he created. A small pain. A question about the wound. A checkup that could have waited. Maya noticed eventually. Of course she did. She noticed the pattern, the timing, the way he stayed a second longer each time. But she didn't call it out. Not because she didn't understand, but because she respected space. If someone wanted to stay, they would stay. If they didn't, no question would make them. That was her rule. And Ethan stayed, slowly. Conversations grew. Small at first. Long day. Yeah. You? Same. Then a little more. You always work this late? Most days? That sounds exhausting. You get used to it. He learned that she worked double shifts when she needed extra money. That she lived with her mother. That she didn't talk much about herself unless asked directly. She learned that he worked construction. That his schedule changed often. That he didn't complain about anything, even when it was clear he carried more than he said. There was no moment where everything changed, no sudden realization. It built quietly, the way real things often do. One evening, after a longer shift, Maya stepped outside the clinic and found Ethan leaning against his truck. You forgot this? He held up a small container, her lunch. She had left it in the break room. She looked at it, then at him. You came back for this? He shrugged. I was still around. That wasn't true. He had driven back across the city. But he didn't say that. She took the container. Thank you. There was a pause, a quiet one, the kind that usually ends conversations. But this time, it didn't. Have you eaten? He asked. She hesitated. Not because she didn't understand the question, but because she did. Not yet. There's a diner a few blocks away, he said. Nothing fancy. She almost said no. That was her instinct. Keep things simple. Keep things controlled. But something in the way he said it, no pressure, no expectation, just an offer, made it harder to refuse. Okay, she said. The diner was small. Old booths, soft lights. The kind of place where people didn't pretend to be anything. They sat across from each other, menus open, but neither really reading. You don't seem like someone who eats here often, Maya said. He looked around. Maybe that's why I should. She almost smiled. They ordered simple food, eggs, toast, coffee, nothing expensive, nothing impressive. But the conversation that followed mattered more than anything on the table. They talked about work, about the city, about how people moved through it differently depending on what they had. Ethan listened more than he spoke. Maya spoke more than she usually did, not because she was trying to impress him, but because she felt safe enough to be honest. That was new. After that night, things shifted slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough. Ethan started helping more, fixing a loose hinge at her apartment, checking the roof after a storm, carrying groceries without making it feel like charity. Maya resisted at first. You don't have to do this. He would shrug. I know. That answer made it harder to refuse, because he wasn't doing it out of obligation. He was choosing to, and that mattered. One evening, while fixing a broken light in her kitchen, he noticed the oxygen machine, the medications, the careful arrangement of everything. Your mom? He asked. Maya nodded. She's been sick for a while. He didn't ask more. He didn't offer empty sympathy. He just said, if you ever need help, let me know. She looked at him for a moment, not long, just enough to understand he meant it. And slowly, without either of them naming it, something real began to form. Not loud, not dramatic, but steady, honest. The kind of connection built on presence, not promises. And for the first time in a long time, Maya allowed herself to feel something she had been careful to avoid. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Something quiet. Something dangerous. Because what they were building felt real. And real things, in a world like theirs, rarely stayed simple for long. The shift did not happen slowly. It did not give warning. It came all at once, the way life sometimes does when it decides you have been calm for too long. It started on a night that felt ordinary. Maya had just finished a long shift. Her body was tired. Her mind was quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when you have done everything you can for the day. Ethan had texted earlier. Running late? Big day tomorrow. She had read it, smiled slightly. Put her phone down. That was how their connection worked. No pressure, no constant talking, just presence when it mattered. That night, she went home, checked on her mother, made dinner, and sat for a moment longer than usual. Something felt off, not wrong, just unsettled. She did not know why. Around midnight, her phone rang. Not a message, a call, unknown number. She hesitated before answering. Hello? There was a pause, then a voice, professional, controlled. Is this Maya Carter? Her chest tightened slightly. Yes. Another pause. This is Mercy General Hospital. We need you to come in. Her fingers tightened around the phone. Why? The answer came too calmly. Ethan Cole has been admitted. He was involved in an accident. For a moment, everything inside her went still. Not panic, not yet. Just a blank space where thoughts should have been. Is he okay? She asked. The pause this time was longer. He is in critical condition. That was the moment the ground shifted. Maya did not remember grabbing her keys. She did not remember the drive. Only the red lights she barely noticed. And the way her hands shook when she finally stopped the car. The hospital was brighter than it should have been at that hour. Too clean, too quiet. She walked in, gave his name, and was directed down a hallway that felt longer than it was. When she saw him, she almost did not recognize him. Tubes, machines, monitors blinking with quiet urgency. His face pale. Still, not the man who stood in her kitchen fixing a light just days before. This version of him felt distant, fragile, real in a way she was not ready for. A doctor approached her, spoke in careful words. Severe head trauma, internal injuries. He is in a coma. Maya nodded slowly, like she understood, but understanding and accepting were not the same thing. Can I see him? She asked. The doctor hesitated for a fraction of a second, then nodded. Briefly, she stepped closer, looked at him. Not at the machines, at him. You said you'd be late, she whispered, her voice barely there. Not gone. There was no response. Of course there wasn't. But she stayed anyway, because leaving felt wrong. Time passed differently in that room. Minutes felt longer. Thoughts came slower. She noticed things she would not have noticed before. The steady rise and fall of his chest. The faint sound of the monitor. The stillness. Too much stillness. And then something else settled in, not fear, something deeper. Realization. She had not said it out loud yet, not even to herself, but it was there. What they had built mattered more than she had allowed herself to admit, and now it could be gone. Days passed, then more days. Ethan did not wake up. The hospital became a second routine. Work, home, hospital, repeat. Maya stayed steady, because she had to. But her body began to change. Small things at first. Fatigue that did not match her schedule. Nausea in the mornings. A strange heaviness she could not explain. She ignored it at first. There was too much happening already. But the signs did not go away. One afternoon, after nearly dropping a tray at work because her hands suddenly felt weak, a colleague looked at her carefully. Maya, when was the last time you checked on yourself? She frowned slightly. I'm fine. The colleague didn't argue, just handed her a small box, quietly. Just check. Maya stared at it for a moment, then took it. She did not go home right away. She did not want to sit with that possibility alone. Instead, she used a small restroom at the clinic, locked the door, stood still for a second longer than needed, then followed the instructions without thinking too much. Waiting was the hardest part. Seconds stretching longer than they should. Her mind moving faster than her breath. Then she looked. 2 lines, clear, undeniable. For a moment, she did not react, not shock, not joy, just silence. Deep, heavy silence. Her hand moved slowly to her stomach, as if confirming something that had already been decided. No, she whispered. but not as a denial, more like a quiet acknowledgement of how much everything had just changed. She sat down, breathed once, then again, and slowly the reality settled in. She was pregnant with his child, while he lay unconscious in a hospital bed, unable to speak, unable to confirm, unable to protect her from what would come next. Maya closed her eyes, not to escape, but to gather herself, because she understood something clearly in that moment. This was not just her truth. This was a responsibility, a choice, a path that would not be easy, and the world she lived in would not make it easier. She stood up slowly, looked at herself in the mirror, the same face, the same woman. But something inside had shifted permanently. She placed a hand over her stomach again, this time not in disbelief, in quiet acceptance. "I'm here," she whispered. Not to Ethan, not to the world, to the life growing inside her. And she knew, without needing anyone to confirm it, that nothing from this moment forward would stay simple, and the storm that was coming would not ask for permission before it arrived. The chaos did not wait. It did not build slowly. It arrived all at once, loud, public, and impossible to ignore. It started the morning the news broke. At first, it was just a headline buried between business reports and local updates. Young developer Ethan Cole in critical condition after late-night accident. Then the name spread. Not the one Maya knew. Not the quiet man with dusty boots and calm eyes. The other name. The real one. Cole. Within hours, everything changed. News vans lined up outside the hospital. Cameras, reporters. Questions shouted into the air before answers even existed. And then came the second wave, the one no one expected. The Cole family arrived. Black cars, tinted windows, security moving fast, clearing space like the air itself belonged to them. Richard Cole stepped out first, tall, controlled. The kind of presence that didn't need to raise its voice to take control of a room beside him. Lawyers, advisors, people who looked like they made decisions for a living. They did not speak to the press at first. They moved inside, doors closed. Conversations happened behind glass and silence. Maya watched from a distance. She had never seen this version of Ethan's world before. Not fully. Not like this. It was colder, sharper, more organized. And she understood something immediately. She did not belong in it. Not the way they defined belonging. Still, she stayed, because leaving was not an option. Not anymore. Then the third wave came. And this one changed everything. It began with a single interview. A woman, well-dressed, confident, sitting in front of a camera, speaking carefully but clearly. "I was seeing Ethan Cole for months, and I'm pregnant." The reporter leaned in. "You're saying the child is his?" She nodded. No hesitation. No doubt. The clip went viral in hours. And then, as if that was permission, others followed. Another woman. Then another. Then more. Different backgrounds, different stories, but the same claim. "I'm carrying Ethan's child." Some looked emotional. Some looked calculated. Some looked like they had rehearsed every word. And suddenly, the story was no longer about an accident. It was about inheritance, about legacy, about who would carry the name forward if Ethan did not wake up. Lawyers began to move differently. The Cole family released a short statement. "All claims will be reviewed through proper legal and medical channels." That was all. But it was enough. The message was clear. This was now a matter of power and proof. Maya felt it before she fully understood it. The shift. The way the air around her changed. The way people in the hospital started looking at her differently. Not because they knew her story, but because they had started to hear pieces of it. A nurse, close to Ethan, visiting often. It did not take much for people to start connecting things. Vanessa was the one who brought the story to her directly. She walked into Maya's apartment without knocking, phone already in her hand. "You need to see this." Maya looked up, tired, quiet. "What is it?" Vanessa turned the screen toward her. Interview clips, headlines, faces. So many faces. They're all claiming they're pregnant with his child. Maya stared at the screen, said nothing. Vanessa studied her reaction carefully. Maya, you need to say something. About what? Maya asked. Calm. Too calm. About the fact that you're pregnant too. Silence filled the room. Heavy. Still. Vanessa stepped closer. If you don't speak now, they're going to control the entire narrative. Maya shook her head slowly. I'm not doing this on television. This isn't about pride, Vanessa said. Sharper now. This is about position. If he doesn't wake up, everything goes through legal claims. Do you understand what that means? Maya understood more than she wanted to, but something inside her resisted. Not fear, not exactly. Something deeper. I'm not turning my life into a story for people to argue over, she said quietly. Vanessa exhaled, frustrated. Then they will do it for you. And she was right. Because by the next day, speculation had already begun. Online forums, comment sections, people asking who the real woman was, who was telling the truth, who was lying. And buried among those questions, slowly rising, was another narrative. There was a nurse, someone from the hospital, but she's probably just another one. Maya saw it, read it, closed the screen, opened it again, as if confirming it was real. The world was already deciding who she was without ever hearing her speak. At the hospital, things grew more tense. Security tightened. Access became limited. Even Maya, who had been visiting quietly, was now questioned at the entrance. Purpose of visit? Relationship to patient? She answered simply, calmly, but she felt it. The shift from invisible to suspicious, from unnoticed to watched. And still, she said nothing publicly, because for her, this was not a story. It was a life. It was a child. It was something too real to be thrown into a storm of opinions and headlines. But the storm did not care about her boundaries. It kept growing. More interviews, more claims, more women stepping forward, some with documents, some with photos, some with nothing but confidence. And each one made Maya's truth feel smaller in the eyes of the world. Not because it was less real, but because it was less visible. And in a world driven by noise, silence is often mistaken for absence. One night, after another long visit to the hospital, Maya sat alone in her car, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark window. Calm, composed, but her eyes told a different story. She placed a hand gently over her stomach, not out of fear, out of grounding. I know the truth, she whispered, not to convince the world, just to remind herself, because that was all she had right now, her truth, and the strength to hold it, without letting the noise break it. But deep down, she understood something was coming. This was only the beginning. The claims, the pressure, the attention. It would not stop here. It would get louder, messier, more personal. And soon, staying silent would no longer be an option, because the world was already choosing sides. And the moment she stepped forward, everything she protected would be tested in ways she could not yet see. The moment Maya realized silence was no longer protecting her, everything began to move faster than she could control. The claims kept growing, the headlines kept multiplying, and the question the world wanted answered became louder every day. Who was telling the truth? Who was lying? And who would prove it first? The Cole family did not wait long to respond. Within days, their legal team announced the first official step. All women claiming to be pregnant with Ethan Cole's child would be required to undergo medical verification. Blood work, genetic screening, documentation. It sounded fair. It sounded clean. It sounded like truth would finally separate itself from noise, but reality was never that simple. Maya sat in a quiet room at a private clinic she had never been to before. Everything about the place felt controlled. Soft lighting, clean surfaces, staff that spoke carefully and avoided eye contact longer than necessary. This was not her world. This was Ethan's world, or more accurately, his family's world. A nurse handed her forms. Please fill these out completely. Maya nodded, her hands steady. Even if her thoughts were not. Around her, other women waited too. Some looked confident, some nervous, Some whispered into their phones like they were reporting back to someone else. Maya kept to herself, because she knew something most of them did not. This was not just a process. This was a game. And she had no idea what the rules really were. Test 1 began with simple procedures: blood samples, medical history, pregnancy confirmation. On paper, it was straightforward science, evidence, facts. But even in that room, Maya felt something was off. Subtle things. The way certain patients were taken in faster. The way some conversations happened behind closed doors that should have been routine. The way one woman walked out smiling before her results were even processed. Maya noticed it. She always noticed. But she had no proof, only instinct. And instinct does not hold up in a system built on paperwork. Days later, the results were released. Not all at once, carefully, strategically. Enough to keep the story alive. Enough to keep people watching. Several women were confirmed pregnant. That alone was not surprising. But then came the second part. Preliminary indicators suggested possible links to Ethan Cole. Not confirmed, not denied, just enough ambiguity to create doubt. And doubt spread faster than truth ever could. The media exploded again. Multiple viable claims. The mystery deepens. Who is the real mother? Maya read it once, then put her phone down, because she understood what was happening. The system was not giving answers. It was creating confusion. And confusion made it easier to control the outcome. Vanessa saw it too. But she responded differently. She leaned into it. "This is exactly why you need to be louder," she said, pacing in Maya's apartment. "They're not trying to find the truth, they're trying to shape it." Maya sat still. "I don't know how to fight this," she admitted. And for the first time, her voice carried something fragile. Not weakness, just honesty. Vanessa stopped pacing, looked at her, studied her. "Then you learn," she said, "or you lose." That word stayed in the room longer than it should have. Lose, not just the argument, not just the claim, everything. The second test came quickly, and this one was not about science. It was about story. The Cole family's team began verifying relationships, not through emotion, through evidence, messages, photos, locations, timelines. Every woman was asked to prove not just that she was pregnant, but that she had been close to Ethan, that she had a real connection. And this was where things became dangerous, because evidence can be real, but it can also be created, altered, presented in ways that shift perception. Some women came prepared. Screenshots of conversations, photos at restaurants, location tags, even witnesses. Their stories lined up too perfectly. Clean, polished, easy to believe. Maya had none of that. Not in the way they expected. Her connection with Ethan had been quiet, private, real. No public photos, no social posts, no messages designed to prove anything. Just moments, shared, lived, unrecorded, and in a system that valued visible proof. Invisible truth struggled to survive. When it was her turn, she sat across from a legal representative who did not smile, did not react, only listened. "Describe your relationship with Ethan Cole." Maya paused. Not because she did not know the answer, but because she understood the risk of how it would sound. "We met at the clinic," she said. "He came in for treatment. We stayed in contact." The representative nodded slightly. "Do you have documentation of this relationship?" Maya shook her head. "No formal documentation." The pen stopped for a moment, just long enough to signal something had shifted. "Any messages? Some? Photos? No. Witnesses?" Maya hesitated, then answered honestly. "No." The representative wrote something down. Calm, neutral. But Maya felt it. The judgment, not personal, procedural. She was becoming less credible on paper. And in this process, paper mattered more than truth. Outside the room, the pressure grew worse. Online, her name had started to circulate. Not confirmed, not official, but enough. Comments, questions, assumptions. Another one, probably lying. looking for money. Some messages were worse, direct, personal, cruel in ways people only are when they feel protected by distance. Maya read some of them, then stopped, because she understood something clearly. This was not about her as a person. This was about what she represented in their minds, and they had already decided what that was. At work, things changed too. Colleagues whispered more, some avoided her, some looked at her with quiet sympathy. Patients still trusted her. But the air was different, heavier, like everyone was waiting to see what she would become. Maya tried to hold on to what she knew, her truth, her work, her values. But even strength has limits when it is tested from every direction. One night, after everything had been said and nothing had been resolved, she sat on the edge of her bed, phone in her hand, screen dark. She did not cry. She did not panic. She just sat there, breathing slowly, thinking clearly. And for the first time, she asked herself a question she had been avoiding. Not, what is true? She knew that. But what does it take to prove truth in a world that profits from doubt? That was a different question, a harder one, and she did not have the answer yet. But she knew she would have to find it. Because if she didn't, the story being written about her would become the only one people believed. And somewhere in that growing noise, someone close to her was already beginning to see an opportunity instead of a problem. And that shift, quiet as it was, would soon change everything. The betrayal did not begin with a single moment. It began quietly, almost invisible, the way cracks form before a wall collapses. Vanessa did not change overnight, not in a way anyone could point to. She still showed up, still called, still sat across from Maya with the same calm voice, the same concerned expression. But something underneath had shifted, and Maya felt it before she understood it. It was in the way Vanessa asked questions, not just listening anymore, but measuring, not just supporting, but guiding the conversation toward certain answers. What exactly did Ethan say to you that night? Did he ever mention other women? Are you sure you were the only one? At first, Maya answered simply, honestly, because she trusted her, because she always had. Vanessa nodded, took it in. But her eyes lingered longer now, like she was calculating something beyond friendship. The pressure from outside kept growing. Media, legal teams, public opinion. It was everywhere. And in the middle of it, Vanessa stepped closer, not away. You need strategy, she said one night, sitting across from Maya with her laptop open. This isn't just about truth anymore. It's about how truth is present. Maya watched her quietly. I don't want to turn this into something it's not. Vanessa leaned forward. It already is. That was the first moment something inside Maya hesitated. Not enough to pull away, but enough to notice. Vanessa began helping more actively. She drafted statements, suggested talking points, even reached out to contacts in media just to feel the temperature. She framed it as protection, as preparation, as being the only person in Maya's corner who understood how this world worked, and in many ways she was right. Maya did not understand this world. Not the way stories could be shaped, not the way perception could become reality before facts ever caught up. So she let Vanessa help. Carefully, slowly, but she let her in. And that was where the line began to blur, because while Maya was trying to hold on to truth, Vanessa was beginning to see something else entirely. Opportunity. It started as a thought she did not say out loud. A small one, easy to ignore. Why her? Why not me? She pushed it away at first, but the more she watched the situation unfold, the harder it became to ignore. The attention, the money involved, the power behind the Cole name. The way the entire city was waiting for an answer that would change someone's life forever. Vanessa had worked her whole life trying to get into rooms like this. Rooms where decisions mattered, where names carried weight, where futures were decided with signatures and statements. And now she was close. Closer than she had ever been. But not for herself. For Maya. and that truth began to feel unbearable. One afternoon, Vanessa sat alone in her car, engine off, phone in her hand, watching another interview play. Another woman, another claim, another story being believed simply because it was told confidently enough. Vanessa stared at the screen, then at her own reflection in the dark glass. "I could do this," she whispered. Not as a plan, just as a realization. And once that thought existed, it did not leave. It grew, quietly, patiently. Back in Maya's apartment, everything still felt the same on the surface. Two friends, sitting, talking, trying to navigate something bigger than both of them. But underneath, Vanessa had already begun to shift positions. She started asking different questions. What if they never accept your version? What if the system is already against you? What if being right isn't enough? Maya listened, tired, overwhelmed. "Then I keep telling the truth," she said. Vanessa smiled slightly, but there was no warmth in it this time. "That's not how this world works." That night, something changed permanently. It happened without warning, without build-up, just a notification. Maya's phone buzzed, then again, then again. Messages, calls, alerts. She picked it up slowly, opened one link, and everything inside her went still. There it was, on every platform, every channel, every headline. Vanessa Blake, sitting in front of a camera, composed, confident, speaking clearly. "I had a private relationship with Ethan Cole, and yes, I'm pregnant." The words did not echo. They did not repeat. They just landed, heavy, final. Maya stared at the screen, not blinking, not reacting, just absorbing it, as if her mind needed time to catch up to what her eyes had already seen. Vanessa continued speaking, calm, controlled, sharing details, enough to sound real, enough to be believed. And then came the part that broke something deeper. "I stayed quiet because I didn't want attention. But I can't stay silent anymore while the truth is being questioned." Maya's fingers tightened around the phone, not in anger, in disbelief. This was not just betrayal. This was replacement. Vanessa was not just entering the story. She was taking it, rewriting it, claiming space that had never been hers. The calls started immediately. Friends, colleagues, unknown numbers. Maya did not answer. She could not yet, because the question that mattered most was not what the world was saying. It was what had just happened inside her own life. She stood up slowly, walked to the window, looked out at a city that suddenly felt unfamiliar. Not because it had changed, but because she had. Everything she thought was stable was not. Everything she thought she understood was incomplete. And the person she trusted most had just stepped into the storm, not beside her, but against her. Hours later, Vanessa called. Maya let it ring. Then again and again. Finally, she answered. Silence. Then Vanessa's voice. Softer now. "Maya? I can explain." Maya closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them. "Explain what?" Her voice was calm. Too calm. "This wasn't supposed to happen like this," Vanessa said quickly. "I was trying to protect you, to control the narrative before it got worse." Maya almost laughed, not out of humor, out of something breaking. "By becoming part of it." Vanessa hesitated. "You don't understand how this works." Maya nodded slowly. "No, I do now." There was a pause. Heavy. Final. And in that pause, everything between them ended, not loudly, not dramatically, just completely. Because some betrayals don't just hurt. They reveal truth you can never unsee. And as Maya stood there, holding her phone, feeling the weight of everything collapse and rebuild at the same time, she understood one thing clearly. This was no longer just about proving she was right. It was about surviving a system where even the people closest to you could turn your truth into their opportunity. And from this moment forward, she would have to fight not just the world, but the version of her story that someone else was now trying to own. By the time Maya understood that truth alone would not save her, She had already lost ground in ways she could not see but could feel everywhere. The narrative was no longer neutral. It had shape now. Direction, momentum, and it was moving away from her. Vanessa's interview had changed everything. Not just because of what she said, but because of how she said it. Calm, controlled, confident, the kind of confidence that makes people believe before they question. And belief, once formed, is harder to break than any lie. Maya sat in her car outside the hospital one evening, hands resting on the steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead, but not really seeing anything. She had spent the entire day moving between silence and noise, silence inside herself, noise everywhere else, headlines, comments, analysts now discussing the strongest claim. Vanessa's name was being repeated more than anyone else's, not because she had the most proof, but because she presented it best. That was when Maya made a decision she had been avoiding. She could not stay passive anymore, not because she wanted to fight, but because she had no choice. If she did nothing, her truth would disappear under better-told stories, and she refused to let that happen. Not for herself, not for the child growing inside her. The next morning, she returned to the clinic where she and Ethan had first met, not as a nurse this time, as someone searching for something that had never been meant to prove anything. Records, schedules, patient logs. She moved carefully, not breaking rules, not forcing access, just looking for traces, dates, times, confirmation that Ethan had been there, that he had returned, that their connection, quiet as it was, had existed in the real world. She found small things, appointment entries, follow-up visits, notes written in her own handwriting, nothing dramatic, nothing powerful on its own, but real, and real mattered. She requested access to archived security footage. Not all of it, just specific days. The system was old, not perfect, but it stored enough. Hours later, sitting in a small office with a flickering monitor, she watched, frame by frame, Ethan walking in, sitting, waiting, coming back again, leaving slower each time. Not proof of love, but proof of presence, proof that he chose to return, that mattered more than any staged photo. Maya copied what she could, saved everything carefully, not knowing yet how she would use it, but knowing she would need it. At the hospital, she pushed further, not emotionally, strategically. She requested access to Ethan's medical timeline, not his condition, but his location history within the system, admission logs, emergency intake details, timestamps. She wanted something specific. The night of the accident, where he had been, who had been notified. The details were limited, protected, but not invisible. What she saw confirmed something important. Ethan had not been with any of the women claiming publicly that night. His last known location before the incident did not match any of their stories. It did not prove he was with Maya either. But it created space. Space for doubt. Space for contradiction. And in a situation like this, contradiction was powerful. But as Maya began to build something real, something grounded, something that could stand on its own, something else was happening at the same time. Vanessa was not standing still. She was moving faster now, more visible, more prepared, new interviews, more details, carefully released information, photos that had not appeared before, messages that looked convincing, not perfect, but strong enough to pull attention further away from Maya. And then the interference began, subtle at first. Maya returned to the clinic one evening to retrieve a file she had already reviewed. It was gone, not deleted, just misplaced. The staff could not explain it. It should be here, but it wasn't. Another day, the security footage she had accessed earlier suddenly became corrupted. Files that had played clearly before now froze midway, glitched, unusable. Maya stared at the screen, not surprised, just confirmed. This was no longer coincidence. Someone was watching the same path she was taking. and they were removing pieces before she could use them. She did not need proof to know who it was. Vanessa had access. Vanessa had motivation. Vanessa understood exactly which parts of the truth were dangerous. That night, Maya sat in her apartment, papers spread across the table, phone turned off, mind fully focused for the first time in days. She was no longer reacting. She was thinking, carefully, precisely. Because this was no longer about emotion, it was about structure, evidence, sequence, what could not be easily erased. She realized something critical. Everything she had been collecting could be altered, lost, challenged. But one thing could not. Biological truth, DNA, but not the kind already being controlled by the system. Not the kind filtered through private clinics and legal channels influenced by power. She needed independent verification, raw data, untouched. But to get that, she needed access. And that meant getting close to Ethan again, closer than she had been allowed recently. The hospital had tightened restrictions. Family's approval was now required for most interactions, and the Cole family was not interested in granting her anything. Not without proof. It was a closed circle, designed that way, but systems always have edges. And Maya had spent years working inside one. She knew where people overlooked things. Late hours, shift changes, moments when protocol became routine, and routine became blind. She did not break rules, but she moved through them differently. One evening, during a quieter shift, she was allowed brief access. Not as a partner, not as anything official, just as someone who had been there before things became complicated. She stood beside Ethan again. The same stillness, the same machines. But this time, she saw him differently, not just as someone she loved, but as the center of a truth everyone was trying to control. "I need you," she whispered. Not for comfort, for clarity. She reached for his hand gently, not expecting movement, just contact. Something real, in a situation filled with manipulation. And in that moment, standing there between silence and strategy, she understood something fully. This was not a fair fight. It was never meant to be, but fairness was not the same as possibility. And as long as something real still existed beneath everything being built on top of it, she still had a chance, even if it was small, even if it was fragile. And somewhere beyond that room, beyond her awareness, Vanessa was already preparing her next move, one that would not just interfere, but attempt to end the game entirely before Maya could even make her final step. By the time everything came to a head, the story no longer belonged to truth. It belonged to whoever controlled the final moment, and Vanessa understood that better than anyone. She moved first, not loudly, not dramatically, but precisely. The final verification hearing was announced with little notice, private, closed to the public, only legal representatives, medical experts, and the primary claimants allowed inside. That was where the decision would be made. That was where everything would end. Maya arrived early. Not because she felt confident, but because she refused to be late to the moment that would define her life. The room was cold, controlled, designed to remove emotion. Vanessa was already there, composed, dressed perfectly, sitting upright like she had rehearsed every second of this moment. She glanced at Maya once, not with guilt, not with apology, with certainty. That was what made it worse. This was not a mistake, it was a choice. The proceedings began quickly. Data was presented. Medical results, timelines, claims. One by one, the women were evaluated. Some were dismissed immediately. Inconsistencies, weak evidence, stories that could not hold under pressure. The room slowly narrowed. Fewer names, fewer voices, until only two remained. Maya Carter, Vanessa Blake. The contrast between them could not have been sharper. Maya sat still, quiet, no performance, no attempt to impress, just presence. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, engaged, controlled, every answer measured, every word placed exactly where it needed to be. Then Vanessa presented her evidence, and that was when the room shifted. Messages, screenshots, photos, location data, a timeline that appeared complete, clean, convincing. It connected every piece. It filled every gap. It left no room for doubt. Or at least that was how it looked. Maya watched it unfold without interrupting. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she understood something deeply in that moment. This was not about speaking louder. This was about surviving long enough for the truth to surface. When it was her turn, the difference was obvious. Her evidence was smaller, simpler, less polished. Clinic logs, partial footage, fragments of a real story that had never been meant to prove anything. Compared to Vanessa's presentation, it looked incomplete, weak, and the room reacted accordingly. Subtle shifts, small glances, decisions forming before they were announced. Maya felt it, not emotionally, structurally. She was losing. Not because she was wrong, but because she did not play the same game. The lead examiner spoke carefully. Based on the current evidence, the claim presented by Ms. Blake appears more substantiated. The words landed exactly as expected. Clean, final, almost official. Maya closed her eyes for a brief second. Not in defeat, in clarity. Because she knew something they did not. Or at least something they had not seen yet. Vanessa sat back slightly, not smiling, but satisfied. This was the moment she had built toward. The moment where belief would become decision, where narrative would become truth or something close enough to it. And then it happened. Not dramatically, not loudly, but enough to stop everything. A voice, weak, uncertain, but real. That's not correct. Every head in the room turned, slowly, as if time needed a second to adjust. The sound had come from the doorway, and standing there, supported by a doctor, pale but conscious, was Ethan Cole. The room did not react immediately because disbelief takes time, but reality does not wait. Ethan stepped forward slightly, his voice still unsteady. That timeline fit isn't real. Vanessa froze, just for a fraction of a second. But it was enough for the room to notice, enough for the control she held to shift. The examiner stood. Mr. Cole, you should not be here. Ethan shook his head slightly. I should. His eyes moved across the room, then settled on Maya. Not dramatically, not emotionally, just recognition, clear, unmistakable. Then he spoke again. I've seen those messages. He looked at Vanessa now. They're edited. The word landed harder than anything before it. Edited. Not fake, not completely false, but manipulated. And that difference mattered. Vanessa's composure cracked slightly, but visibly. That's not true, she said quickly. Too quickly. Ethan didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. There's a backup. Silence fell again. Not confusion this time, anticipation, because backup meant data, and data could not be argued with the same way stories could. Within minutes, a technician was called, systems accessed, archived communication logs retrieved directly from Ethan's secured cloud account, untouched, unfiltered, and there it was, the full record, unedited. Messages that matched some of Vanessa's claims, but also revealed what had been removed. Context, timing, gaps that changed everything, conversations that did not align, interactions that were one-sided, moments that had been rearranged to create something that never truly existed. And more importantly, one absence, clear, undeniable. There was no consistent relationship, no sustained connection. No reality behind the narrative Vanessa had built. The room shifted again, completely this time. Not slowly, not subtly, decisively, Vanessa tried to speak, to explain, to reframe. But it was too late, because once the structure breaks, everything built on it collapses with it. Then came the final piece. Ethan looked at Maya again, his voice quieter now, but stronger. She's the only one I was with. No performance, no exaggeration, just truth, simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. Maya did not move, did not react outwardly, but something inside her finally settled. Not relief, not victory, something deeper, alignment. The truth she had carried quietly was now standing on its own, without effort, without force, because it had always been real. The examiner spoke again, this time with no hesitation. The claim by Miss Carter is the only one supported by verified evidence. And just like that, the story changed. Not because Maya fought harder, but because the truth finally had space to exist without interference. Vanessa sat still, no longer composed, no longer in control, not defeated loudly, just exposed. And in that exposure, everything she had tried to become collapsed into what she had chosen to do. The room began to move again. Voices, decisions, consequences being set in motion. But for Maya, everything felt quieter. Not because the world had changed, but because she had survived it without losing herself. And as she stood there, looking at Ethan, understanding without words passing between them, she realized something important. This was not the end of the story. It was only the moment where truth finally took its place. And what came next would not be about proving anything, but about choosing what kind of life she wanted to build now that she had nothing left to defend. When the truth finally settled, it did not arrive with noise. It arrived quietly, the way something real always does after everything false has fallen apart. The room had already moved on to procedures, legal steps, statements, consequences. But for Maya, none of that mattered in the way it used to, because the one thing she had been holding on to, protecting, defending without ever being able to prove it fully, was now standing on its own. Not because she forced it, but because it had never needed force. Just time. Ethan remained in the hospital for several more weeks. Recovery was slow, careful, not dramatic. There was no instant return to strength, no sudden transformation, just small progress day by day, step by step. And during that time, Maya did not step into the spotlight the way many expected her to. She did not give interviews. She did not stand in front of cameras to claim victory. She stayed close, quiet, present, the same way she had always been. Because for her, this was never about winning. It was about surviving without losing herself. Ethan noticed that, not immediately, but over time, the absence of performance, the absence of expectation. One afternoon, sitting by the window in his hospital room, he looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "You didn't have to stay through all of that." Maya did not look surprised. "I know." He nodded slowly. Most people would have chosen differently. She adjusted the blanket at the edge of his bed. Simple, familiar. Most people weren't there in the beginning. That was her answer. Not romantic, not dramatic. Just true. And that was the moment Ethan understood something clearly. Everything he had tried to escape by hiding his identity, all the noise, the expectations, the pressure, had been stripped away. And what remained was the one person who had never needed to know who he was to choose him. That realization changed him more than the accident ever could. Weeks later, when he was strong enough to stand in front of the world again, Ethan made a decision his family had tried to delay. A public statement, not managed, not filtered. Real. He stood in front of cameras, not as the quiet engineer, but as Ethan Cole, son of one of the most powerful men in the city. And for the first time, he did not avoid that identity. He owned it. "There has been a lot said about my life in the past few weeks," he began, his voice steady, not rehearsed. "Some of it was speculation, some of it was manipulation, but the truth is simple." He paused, not for effect, for clarity. "Maya Carter is the only person I had a real relationship with, and she is the mother of my child." There were no extra words, no embellishment, just truth. and that truth carried more weight than any statement released before it. The reaction was immediate. Media shifted tone. Public opinion followed. The same voices that doubted now tried to correct themselves. But Maya did not engage with it, because she had already learned something important. The world does not always stand with truth. It stands with what it believes, and belief changes. But truth does not. The Cole family responded differently than expected. At first, there had been resistance, quiet pressure, questions about background, about fit, about perception. But after everything that had happened, after seeing how easily the system could be manipulated, something shifted even within them. Respect, not immediate, not perfect, but real enough to grow. Richard Cole met Maya privately. No cameras, no advisors, just a conversation. He studied her the same way people like him always did, measuring, evaluating, but this time the conclusion was different. "You held your ground without resources," he said finally. "That's not something we can teach." Maya did not respond immediately. She simply met his gaze, calm, steady, the same way she had faced everything else. And in that silence, something was understood without needing to be said. Acceptance did not come from approval. It came from recognition. Vanessa's story ended very differently. There were no dramatic arrests, no public breakdown, just consequences, quiet, permanent. Her credibility disappeared first, then her access. Then the networks she had built over years began to distance themselves, not out of morality, but out of self-preservation. That is how those worlds work. She tried to recover, to explain, to reposition. But once trust is broken at that level, it does not return easily, or at all. Maya heard about it, of course she did. People told her. Expected a reaction, satisfaction, maybe even relief, but she gave none of that. Because what Vanessa had lost was not something Maya wanted to witness or carry. Some consequences speak for themselves, and some lessons are not meant to be observed, only understood. Months passed, the noise faded. The story moved on to something new, as it always does. And what remained was something quieter. A life. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Maya continued working at the clinic. Not because she had to anymore, but because it was still part of who she was, caring for people, listening, showing up without needing recognition. Ethan adjusted too, not by leaving his world, but by changing how he existed in it, more present, less controlled by expectation, more aware of the gap between power and reality. And slowly, they built something together, not based on what they had gone through, but on what they chose after it. Their child was born on a quiet morning. No cameras, no headlines, just a small room, soft light, and the sound of a new beginning. Maya held the baby first. Calm, focused, the same way she held everything that mattered. Ethan stood beside her, not as a man above her, not as a man separate from her, just there, present, equal. And in that moment, everything that had been loud before felt distant, because what mattered had never been the fight. It had been what survived it. And as Maya looked down at the life in her arms, she understood something fully. She had not won because she proved something to the world. She had won because she never let the world change who she was. And that was something no one could take, no matter how loud the story became.